Hello, nice to see you on my channel, Hearts and Shadows. Enjoy watching.
My name is Dennis. When I caught the woman I loved cheating, she made it clear she was ready to move on, even laughing in my face as our marriage ended. I was blindsided by her betrayal. She was eager to be done with me, like she already knew what her next step was going to be. But then something happened. The confidence she had when we first started the divorce process shifted the moment she found out she was walking away with nothing. She didn't know who she was really married to. And suddenly, the smirk disappeared. I'll get into all of it. Please like and comment on where you are watching from. I met Catherine at a friend's birthday party. One of those casual backyard gatherings with music. I wasn't even supposed to go, to be honest. At the time, I was still carrying the weight of a pretty rough breakup that happened months ago. It was a long relationship, and when it fell apart, I wasn't really in the mood to be social since then. I threw myself into work because it was easier than anything else. That night, I found myself there, drink in hand, making small talk with people I knew. And then I saw Catherine. She was helping out at the event. I remember she handed me a napkin at one point, and I used that small moment as my excuse to strike up a conversation. She laughed as she responded. I found myself watching for her after that, waiting for her to come near again so we could talk more. Every time she passed by, I'd find something to say. We ended up standing in a corner of the yard talking about everything, and she seemed genuinely interested. By the end of the night, I knew I didn't want it to end there. Before she left, I asked for her number. I didn't want to let the moment slip. She gave it with a smile. We texted the next day, and the day after that. The conversations picked up right where we left off, like we hadn't skipped a beat. It was refreshing. So I asked her out. Our first date was at a quiet Italian place I liked. We talked for hours. And the more I learned, the more I wanted to know. We kept seeing each other. Week after week, we carved out time to be together, even when work got hectic. There were no mixed signals with Catherine. So, after a handful of dates that just kept getting better, I asked her to be my girlfriend. She didn't hesitate as she smiled and said yes, like she'd been waiting for me to ask. After the mess of my last relationship, I told myself I wasn't going to repeat the same mistakes. That experience humbled me. So when Catherine came into my life, I approached things differently. I made a conscious decision to show up, not just physically, but emotionally. I wanted her to feel heard, appreciated, and safe with me. In the early days, I did what I thought any good man should do. I brought her flowers regularly. I left little notes around her apartment. I took her to restaurants I knew she'd never been to, booked surprise weekend trips, and bought her small things she'd casually mentioned in conversation. I was trying to show her I paid attention. And to be fair, she responded in kind. Catherine started cooking at my place often. She was present in a way I hadn't experienced in my previous relationship. It felt refreshing. After a few months, I introduced her to my family. I'm the only child, and my parents have always been protective of me, especially my mother. My dad's more reserved, but my mom reads people. She doesn't say much when she's unsure about someone, but I could tell something about Catherine didn't sit right with her. She was polite, of course, but I remember her pulling me aside afterward and saying, "Just take your time with this one. Not everything that glitters is gold." I didn't want to hear it, not then. I was too caught up in the comfort Catherine brought. I told myself Mom was just being overly cautious and even a bit territorial. So I brushed it off. What Catherine and most people didn't know was that my financial life didn't look how it seemed on the surface. Yes, I had money, but most of it wasn't in my name. Years ago, my parents set up a trust in their name. The goal was to protect the family assets and reduce tax burdens, especially as my parents aged. Since I'm their only child, the trust was structured in a way that I'd benefit from it while keeping liabilities away from my name. They advised me strongly to make all major purchases through the trust. And I listened partly out of respect for their wisdom, partly to give them peace of mind. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I just wanted to avoid probate and a mountain of paperwork if anything ever happened. But that decision would become the most important line of defense I never realized I'd need. After 2 years of dating, I proposed to Catherine. I didn't rent out a rooftop or hire a violinist. It was just the two of us, standing in the middle of a quiet beach at sunset, and I asked her if she wanted to do life together. She said yes before I could even finish the question. We didn't waste time with a long engagement. Within months, we had a wedding date, invitations, vendors, everything lined up. She moved into my home shortly after we got engaged, and that's when things started to shift, though I didn't realize it back then. On the surface, everything looked perfect. But underneath all that shine, the cracks were already forming. Catherine started to complain about me not spending enough time with her. It didn't matter that I was working 12 to 14-hour days to fund the lifestyle she was enjoying. I'd come home exhausted, and she'd greet me with sarcasm, saying things like, "Nice of you to remember you have a wife." I tried explaining, but she'd brush it off, accusing me of caring more about my work than her. What struck me most, though, was how little interest she showed in how our lifestyle was even possible. She never once asked about our finances, never asked how I structured things, what accounts we had, or how assets were protected. She just assumed everything she saw was mine outright. The house, the cars, the vacation home in Aspen, the watches, even the yacht we chartered once. On paper, I was a man with a modest income and barely any assets. And she had no idea. Still, I spoiled her. I'll admit that. I showered her with gifts, not because she asked, but because I wanted to keep her happy. I thought maybe the gestures would compensate for the hours I was missing at home. Jewelry boxes filled with names she couldn't pronounce, weekend getaways on a whim, shopping trips where I told her not to look at the tags. I did all of that. I gave her financial freedom. A joint credit card with no questions asked, monthly deposits into her personal account. Even helped her set up a small business she said she was passionate about, but she never followed through on. I thought doing all that meant we were solid. I didn't see it as transactional. I saw it as love. The first real crack in our marriage came after we hit the 2-year mark. You know how people say that once the honeymoon phase ends, real life begins? Well, that's exactly what happened. The initial excitement faded, and I started thinking about what came next. Not just vacations or career goals, but something deeper. I wanted a family. I had always pictured myself as a dad one day. I didn't think it was going to be a big issue. We talked loosely about it while dating, nothing too deep, but enough that I believed we were on the same page. So one night I brought it up, saying, "Hey, I've been thinking maybe it's time we started talking about having a baby." She froze for a second. I'll never forget that. Then she kind of scoffed and said, "Are you serious?" I told her I was absolutely serious. Her face changed, and in the most casual tone, she said, "I'm not ruining my body for a child." At first, I was just confused. I thought she misunderstood me, or was just being dramatic. So I tried to explain myself, tried to open up. But she wasn't listening. After that day, every time I tried to revisit the topic, she had a new way of dodging it. One day, it was not yet. The next day, it was maybe in a few years. And, eventually, she just stopped responding altogether. If I brought it up, she'd get annoyed and say I was pressuring her. There was no room for a real conversation anymore. The final time we discussed it turned into a full-blown argument. I told her how much it meant to me, how I'd always dreamed of being a dad, how I thought we were in this together. She responded with, "I have a life to live. And just because you want to play house doesn't mean I have to wreck my body for it." It was like she saw motherhood as some kind of punishment that was beneath her. After that argument, something broke between us. We didn't talk much about it again, but the silence spoke volumes. We stopped being affectionate. We weren't physically intimate anymore. We started existing side by side, like roommates. Polite, distant. We both knew we were still technically married. But in every way that mattered, we weren't. That one disagreement didn't just end a conversation. It tore the emotional thread that had been holding us together. And I guess that's when I realized love isn't just about how things start. It's about what both people are willing to build and what they're willing to sacrifice for the life they promised each other. Over the next few months, I started noticing things in my wife's behavior that I couldn't quite ignore anymore. She started spending more time with friends, most of whom I'd never met, and whenever I asked who they were or what they were doing, her answers felt vague. What used to be simple dinner hangouts turned into overnight stays and then weekend trips. She began to travel more frequently, always insisting it was harmless, but it felt like she was running from something, or maybe toward someone. Her appearance changed, too. She started dressing differently in a way that felt designed to turn heads. Tighter and more revealing outfits. And her phone was always in her hand, always face down when she set it on the table, and she'd step outside to take calls that she used to answer right next to me. She changed her phone's passcode, started texting more and smiling at her screen. Still, I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. I didn't want to be the overbearing husband breathing down her neck. So I stayed quiet at first, convincing myself it would pass. But it didn't. It got worse. Her attitude toward me became colder and more dismissive. And when I finally brought it up, she turned it around on me. She said I was being insecure, controlling, and jealous. She said I didn't trust her, and that I was projecting my own issues onto her. That moment made me feel crazy. By the 4th year of our marriage, we had become strangers under the same roof. We weren't even trying. There was no spark, no intimacy, no conversation that didn't feel forced. We lived like roommates, barely acknowledging each other unless we had to. I buried myself in work again. Not because I was chasing success, but because it was the only thing that didn't feel like it was slipping out of my hands. I worked longer hours, stayed late, answered emails deep into the night, anything to distract myself from the silence waiting at home. But the event of one night shattered everything. It was late, around 11:30 p.m., and I had just woken up after passing out in the living room while listening to a podcast. I didn't make a noise as I walked to the bedroom, but as I reached the hallway, I heard her voice, low. She was in the bedroom on the phone with someone. At first, I thought it was her sister or maybe a friend. But the tone was too intimate, and the words were too deliberate. I didn't want to believe it, but I stood there frozen. I took my phone out, hit record, and captured enough of the conversation to leave no doubt in my mind. She was talking to someone she'd been seeing behind my back. Someone who clearly knew she was married, but didn't care. And neither did she. The next morning, I sat her down. I told her what I'd heard, what I'd recorded. She didn't deny it. Not at first. She just tried to flip the script, accused me of spying, said I was being manipulative. I guess that's what cheaters do. She scrambles, deflects, and twists things that might make one start questioning their own eyes. But I didn't back down. I told her plainly, we're not making it another year like this. And that's when things went bad so fast. She looked me dead in the eye and said, good luck finding someone else who'll tolerate you. I'm taking half anyway. She really believed she had me cornered. That she'd walk out of this marriage with a victory lap and my bank account in her purse. But she never really knew who she married. She stormed out of the room after that speech, and I sat alone with a million thoughts running through my head. I was thinking about the embarrassment. What would people say if this ended publicly? Would I be blamed? Judged? Laughed at for not seeing it sooner? Days later, I was served the divorce papers. It was like Catherine had already begun the process, quietly, behind my back, before I found out she was cheating. Her legal team didn't waste any time either. They came after me aggressively, painting me as some ultra-wealthy husband who owed her a luxurious exit. According to her petition, I was this high-value asset just waiting to be split. They wanted the house, the cars, monthly alimony, the whole list. They made it sound like Catherine had been a supportive wife who had given up everything for me. But if you've heard everything up to this point, you already know that couldn't be further from the truth. I just hired my own legal team. I gave them every piece of documentation they needed and let them do their job. I showed up in court only when it was legally required. The case stretched out over months. Motions, counter-motions, and delays. Catherine thought she had it in the bag. Every time we had a hearing, she was dressed like she was headed to a magazine shoot. Then, when the part they'd all been waiting for arrived, the asset disclosure phase, I handed everything over, every record. And that's when Catherine found out who she had really been married to, or more accurately, what I had kept to myself. Everything that mattered was under a legally binding trust. I didn't hold it in my personal name. Technically, I didn't own much of anything. So when the numbers came in, they weren't what Catherine expected. Her lawyer went pale reading through the statements. There were no beachfront villas, no offshore accounts, no mansion with her name waiting to be signed over. There was just what was legally mine, a modest checking account, a few personal effects, and some side savings. That was it. I watched her closely that day. I saw her face slowly change as it dawned on her that she was entitled to only a fraction of what she thought. She leaned into her lawyer, whispering furiously, but the look on his face told her everything she needed to know. It was over. Still, they didn't want to accept it. They filed another motion, accusing me of hiding assets, claiming I had transferred wealth illegally into the trust to avoid paying her. It was a desperate move, one last attempt to flip the table. But it didn't work. The trust had been created long before she came into my life. Everything was clean, fully legal, and fully documented. The judge dismissed their claims without much deliberation. I wasn't hiding assets. I had just never let her get close to them. After everything went down, a few months later, I heard through someone we both knew that Catherine had moved in with the same guy she had cheated with. But here's the twist. She wasn't living in some penthouse suite like she thought she deserved. It was nothing close to the life I had once given her. That same friend told me she was now footing most of their bills. The man she threw everything away for had no stable income. She went from being supported to doing the supporting. I just felt relieved that I'd gotten out before I was drained. People assume I'd want to see her suffer. That's not the man I am. I don't wish her pain. I wish her well, and I hope she figures herself out, then eventually finds a life that doesn't rely on using other people. Right now, I'm focusing on rebuilding. Thanks to my parents' early wisdom and the trust they left behind, I was never really at risk of losing everything.